Now, last year, Arkansas passed its voter ID laws into effect, making official the policy of having to present a valid photo ID in order to vote. Now, this, of course, could be a driver's license, a state-sanctioned ID, gun license, etc. Basically, any type of pre-approved photo ID. We here on TYT Community, of course, went over some of the problems when it comes to getting some of these voter IDs, especially for people who are elderly or poor or have limited mobility, transportation, etc. Now, a federal court has just recently struck down the law, but as it stands now, it's still effective in the state of Arkansas and is causing a great deal of confusion for the voters. And, ironically, even to one of the proponents of this law. For more of those details, I turn to Arkansas resident and native Jordan French to give us some of the details. Jordan, take it away, sir.
So, again, we want to talk about delicious irony. This story is just chock full of it in so many ways. The man who, unfortunately, in all honesty, will probably be the next governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, went to go vote today, and like all politicians, of course, brought a cadre of reporters, and it's a big deal to get that shot of you casting your vote. There was a wonderful instance whenever Bill Halter was running against Blanche Lincoln a few years back, and it backfired on her. She wasn't allowed to vote in Arkansas because they determined that she didn't have a valid residency there while running for Senate in Arkansas. Anyway, Asa goes to vote, gets to the booth, and realizes that he left his driver's license back in his office and can't vote. Now, this is problematic. I want to talk about something that most news outlets aren't covering, but the Asa's campaign is trying to get ahead of this and stop this. That means he drove to the booth without a driver's license, which, if he had gotten pulled over, wouldn't mean anything because he's Asa Hutchinson, and nothing would have happened to him. But had that happened to Joe Blow, I was just in traffic court this week because of that car wreck I had. I hit city property, so I had to go pay a fine. And like everybody in line in front of me was there for driving without their driver's license on them. Like it's just pitiful. Like that he can openly do this and nobody cares. Now he told a reporter for the Arkansas Times that he got in his pickup truck, went back to his office and got his license and came back and voted. His campaign has since clarified that a staffer went and got that license for him, but that still means he drove himself to the voting booth in the first place without his license on him. But then the obvious issue here is, okay, so this is a very wealthy guy he's only here to vote because it's a publicity stunt. He's there to vote so people can record him voting and he can throw in an ad. If you are a poor American who's trying to, take one of the few ways you have to make your voice be heard, and you're somebody who doesn't have access to a car, and there's lots of people that can't afford cars in Arkansas, and they're mostly minorities. I'm not even talking about the blue-collar worker who can't get off work, because he works a shift. Him working on the floor when he's supposed to be there is what makes the company run. I mean, that guy's plight obviously is enough to think these are stupid. But I'm talking about people who have to maybe miss a meal to be able to afford public transportation fare because we don't have decent public transportation in the South because there's a lot more car ownership than there is. So poor people here are really screwed. But somebody finds a way to afford to buy their license for the first time. Maybe they're 60 years old and they've never had a photo ID. They finally get enough money together, they miss a meal or two and they can afford to buy it. They miss another meal or two and they can afford to get to the voting booth, or they spend the time to find somebody who's volunteered to drive them and get a ride lined up. They do all this stuff, and then they realize, hey, I haven't carried this license on me for 60 years. I'm not used to remembering it. I forgot it. They don't get to vote? There's people out there, this is a huge, it's not an inconvenience like it is for Asa. It's a deterrent. It's an obstacle that stops people from exercising their democratic process, and it's what Asa should say at this point is, oh wow, you know what? Maybe this isn't as simple as having your license on you. Maybe I should show some empathy and rethink my position on this. But this is going to be the first again, he's probably the next governor of the state. And not to get too sidetracked from the story, but this is my state. It's near and dear to my heart. Arkansas has had the fortune of being one of the few places in the world that has had 3 consecutive leaders back to back to back, not counting Jim Guy Tucker, who we kicked out, who have been incredible. Mike Beebe, our current governor, believe it or not, Mike Huckabee was a hell of a governor. He's a different politician than he is TV host. And then Bill Clinton. We've had 3 governors back to back to back from different parties who have been amazing. And Asa Hutchinson is probably going to break that streak. But anyway, I'll go ahead and throw this to you guys. I want to get Lisa's perspective on this, and then Stephen, because I do want to get one more American to weigh in on it, and then Stephen's perspective from this uniquely American problem.
Well, as far as this story in particular, it's just hilarious, right? Because it's like, man, talk about like irony, talk about throwing karma in your face. Here we have somebody who has staunchly been supporting these voter ID laws, and then here it backfires right in his face. But like you were mentioning, it really is too bad that instead of showing some humility and some empathy and some intelligence to say, wow, maybe I really was in the wrong, maybe we should rethink this, he just says like, oh, well, not a big deal, just had a staff forget it, no problem, voted anyways, you all should still vote with your IDs, and we're not really going to try to change the law. But the problem with it's really the voter ID laws in combination with the redistricting laws that both are just thinly veiled attempts at preventing Democrats from voting. Because like you mentioned, the people who this affects the most are people who are poor, people who are minorities, people who are elderly. In short, people who tend to vote Democratic when it comes to the ballot. So really, these are all laws that are being pushed through by Republicans in an attempt to get more Republicans elected and to prevent Democrats from voting. So that's the whole reason that these laws are such big problems in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Lisa said. It's a case of this guy going, oh, like, I'm really in favor of this law. It's going to affect me? Me? Oh, well, maybe it's not such a good idea. I mean, okay, I suppose. Then again, I do have loads of people and staffers who can just help me, get through this problem. It's just a case of so many kind of Republican people in office, how they, and essentially kind of the voter ID laws, as we said, they're hating on the poor and the minorities. That is what they're doing. They're stifling those votes. They just don't care about those people, and they just don't have the ability to empathize with people not in their position. I don't know, it's not all Republicans, certainly not going to tar them all with the same brush, but certainly it seems a vast majority of Republicans who are running for office or are in office, they're just unable to put themselves in other people's shoes. And this is just a perfect case of, oh shit, this law is actually going to affect a lot of people. It's just ridiculous to me.
Well, and to build on that empathy point here, let me throw this out and then get Sean to weigh in, and we'll close the segment out with Jeff. Here's his response. So he has this golden opportunity to show empathy, which to his base is probably a weakness. Empathy equals weakness. But here's what he likened it to. This is my understanding. This is from the Arkansas Times. This is a quote from Asa Hutchinson. He said, responding to people who would say this, what we're saying, like, hey, shouldn't this point out a big flaw in voter ID laws? He said, I'd make this comparison. I've actually done the same thing flying out of an airport. I realized, whoops, I don't have my ID, and I had to go back and get it. That's like how, like, not only can he not show empathy, that's how disconnected he is from the plight of the poor. Like, that he thinks, like, oh, this is just like whenever I'm flying first class in some, for some NRA event, because he's an NRA lobbyist and a private security lobbyist, and he's about to run our country while the rest of the South is passing crazy gun laws, but I don't want to get sidetracked. I said about to run our country, about to run our state, while states around us are pushing for crazy gun laws we've been able to avoid. Anyway, that's what he likens this to. The people who, like, literally, like, it is a sacrifice for them to go vote. He can't see past it. Oh, I forgot my ID for a plane one time, and I had to go back and get it. I even had to buy another ticket because I'm super wealthy and can buy tickets when I forget them. He's such... I can't be professional. Sean, go ahead.
It's insidious and it's intentional.
Yeah, what I wish would have happened is that he would have just pointed to a poster of himself as one of the people that you could vote for and been like, "That's my face," and had a big freak out over this. Instead, he went and got his ID, which was totally lame.
Well,
And
he
by
can't
the
do that,
way,
Sean, because in America it's illegal to have posters of candidates within X amount of feet of a voting booth.
You could have had one on him. Politicians are self-absorbed. But the other issue is he didn't have his gun permit on him, and I don't know what kind of conservative walks around without their gun permit 24/7. So he should have brought that with him as his valid ID. So I think they should dismiss him based on that. And the third point I want to make is an actually serious point. Is that the problem with voter ID laws is that they sound reasonable when you just hear them and you don't think about them. Everybody on the panel who has an ID is like, I got an ID. It wasn't that difficult. But the thing is that these laws are super sinister for like anybody watching, because if you have a student ID, you might think that's a perfectly adequate ID, but those are excluded. A gun permit, because gun owners are more likely to vote for gun candidates, which are Republicans, is included in an acceptable ID. So the laws are set up and cleverly written that even if you think in certain cases, like being a student, that you have the right ID, when you show up to the polls, you turn out to be screwed. And I think that's the worst part about voter IDs, is because most people don't think about them beyond a second. They're like, well, I use an ID to rent a car or whatever. Why not vote?
Well, let me jump in before Jeff does. I do want to clear up one thing to get ahead of the stupid commenters. There is no gun permit in Arkansas. You own a gun without a permit here. What you do have to have a permit for is your concealed carry license, which is a government-issued, not a federal government, a state government-issued photo ID, and that's why it works. Whereas a student ID is not a government-issued ID, but a concealed carry license.
Same thing, though.
Say what?
Student ID from a state school should be the same thing, though.
Well, but if you don't go to a state school, I didn't go to a state school.
And that's another way that it, of course, targets certain people.
Yeah, so I'm not arguing that it doesn't play out the way Sean said. I just don't know that there was quite that much conniving behind it. I think it's just the fact that a concealed carry license is a government-issued photo ID.
So I want to build on what Sean was saying and just add in that, yeah, laws like voter ID, they do sound sensible when you hear about it. But you realize when you look into it that they're not. It's a good way to disenfranchise people from voting, because the fact is, when most people vote, Republicans lose. Now, in 2010, Democrats got shellacked by the Tea Party. Not because the Tea Party outnumbers us or they have like fantastic ideas. It's because the Democrats didn't excite people enough to vote. There was a real sort of throw the bums out mentality on the right, and some apathy, major apathy on the left. Most liberals stayed home. They didn't vote. And of course, midterms are never really exciting to liberals anyway, but nonetheless, they're still super important. And this is one reason you see a lot of these voter ID laws come into effect around big elections as well as midterms, because simply the point is they simply just don't want you to vote. Because when you vote, they lose, and they know it.